Good morning, this is Mr. Shields back again with another video. Today's topic is going to be simplifying non-perfect cube roots here. The process is pretty similar to what we did in the last video as far as simplifying non-perfect square roots, only with a few slight differences. The first big difference, if you'll notice, are the perfect cubes. Those numbers are different. This time we're also dealing with negative numbers in addition to positive numbers. How do I get those numbers? Well, if you notice in orange, I wrote down 1 times 1 times 1, which will give me a positive 1. 2 times 2 times 2 will give me 8. 3 times 3 times 3 will give me 27. Now, of course, the inverse is true. If I do negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1, I'm going to end up with negative 1, and so on. So let's dive right into our very first example, and you can see what I'm talking about as far as the process being fairly similar. So I'm going to break apart this radical sign, and you'll notice that there's a little number 3 here, and that really gives you the indication that you're dealing with the cube root. So it's very important that you write that little cube. A lot of people tend to forget that, and that causes them a little bit of stress sometimes. So if I go ahead and look at 40 here, I'm going to use my perfect cubes to try to figure out what's the biggest perfect cube that can divide cleanly into 40. And I just happen to know that that number is 8. 40 divided by 8 is going to give me 5. Now, if I take my calculator and I do the cube root of 8, I'm going to find out that the cube root of 8 is nothing more than, you probably already guessed, 2. If I were to do the cube root of 5, by contrast, I would end up with a decimal. Once again, we don't want a decimal, so we're going to keep it the same and just bring it on down. And thus my final answer is going to be 2 cube root of 5. Let's continue on down with the odd ones here before I give you a couple to try on your own. Let me try to square this out for you. So if I look at number 21, for instance, I have 2 to the cube root of 432. Pretty big number inside the radical sign here. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take the cube root, and if I look at the biggest perfect cube that's going to go into 432, well, that's going to be 216. Now, be careful. You want to make sure you choose the biggest one, not just the first one that you find here. So you might have to do a little bit of trial and error with this whole process. So do keep that in mind. So if I have 432 divided by 216, I'm going to end up with 2. Now, when I take the cube root of 216, I'm going to get an answer of 6. But if I take the cube root of 2, I would end up with a decimal. I don't want that decimal, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring it on down. So I'd have the cube root of 2. Now I'm not finished because you'll notice that there was a 2 on the outside of the radical sign, so I have to deal with that. So I'm going to bring that on down, bring that 2 down here, and 2 times 6 is going to be 12. So my final answer will actually be 12 to the cube root of 2. Go ahead and circle that one right here for us. Okay. So let's take a look at number 23. And 23 is a little interesting. Let me try to get this straightened out here. If I look at 23, what you're going to notice is for the first time we have a negative number under that radical sign. And that's why these perfect cubes up here. Sorry, I'm on my computer screen, it's actually reverse, but when I'm writing this, obviously the paper is right side up. So just still trying to struggle with getting it so it's nice and straight for you guys. So I do apologize in advance for moving the paper around. So I'm going to still try to find out my biggest perfect cube that's going to go into the cube root of negative 96. But I'm going to make sure that I choose a negative cube, perfect cube, because I have that negative 96. Now, the biggest perfect cube that's going to go into negative 96 here is going to be a negative 8. So I'm going to write down here the cube root symbol here, and then I'm going to have my negative 8. Now, what's also going to be very important is that you obviously get the other number. So negative 96 divided by a negative 8 is going to end up being a positive 12. Now, when I take that negative cube root, I'm going to end up with a negative 2 in my calculator when I do that. So remember, always got to have that little cube root, very important. And so I'm going to bring down that little 3 here and that 12, because if I were to take the cube root of 12, I would end up with a decimal. I don't want that, so I'm going to bring it right on down next to the negative 2. But as you probably guessed correctly, if I slide that 8 down, because I can't forget about that, I'm still going to have to multiply the 8 times a negative 2. Let me bring down my document camera here. And so if I do 8 times negative 2, I'm going to end up with a negative 16 cubed root of 12 being my final answer. Okay. So I'm going to pause the video, or actually you should pause the video here. And I want you to try a couple of problems here. Let me slide it over. I'm not going to do 20, 22, and 24 with you. So I'm just going to pause for a little bit so that you can pause these videos. Try each of these problems. Once you come back, I will write down the answers for you so that way you can check your work. Okay, welcome back. Let's see how you did. So for number 20, you should have ended up with 4 cubed root of 3 as your final answer. For 22, you should have ended up with 10 cubed root of 2. And for 24, you would have ended up with negative 9 cubed root of 7. So hopefully that went well for you. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to myself or Ms. Watkins during our office hours. But let's continue on with the next page here.